Princess Heiyun stood alone in her special room aboard the Imperial flagship. The room was very cold, kept at temperatures that would freeze most creatures. But for her, it was barely cool enough. Her curse made sure of that. She watched the stars through the thick glass window. The window was special too, made of materials that could hold back the intense heat that came from her body. Everything in her room had to be special, because everything normal would melt or break when she got too emotional. "Your Highness, it's time for your daily reading," said Kang Yuna, her attendant, through the communication screen. Even her most trusted helper couldn't be in the same room with her. "Thank you, Yuna," Heiyun said softly. She walked to her desk, careful not to touch anything directly. Her special gloves and clothes, made from the strongest heat-resistant materials in the Celestial Empire, protected everything from her touch. Heiyun remembered the day the curse began. 5 years ago, she had been at a peace meeting with the Flame Seekers, a rival alien group known for their dangerous heat-based weapons. The meeting had gone badly. In their anger, they had cursed her with their most terrible weapon, a curse that turned emotions into deadly heat. The princess picked up her tablet and began reading reports about her empire. Even though she couldn't be with her people, she worked hard to learn everything about them. But today, she couldn't focus. The doctors had told her father, the emperor, that the curse was getting stronger. Heiyun looked at the temperature display on her wall, 182 degrees Celsius around her body. Just thinking about the bad news made it rise to 185. She took slow breaths, trying to stay calm. Getting upset would only make things worse. Through her window, she could see other ships coming close to the Imperial flagship. They were preparing for a big diplomatic meeting. Earth, a planet they had recently discovered, was sending its first official delegation to the Celestial Empire. More visitors who can't come near me, Heiyun thought. She touched the window with her gloved hand. The special glass began to fog up immediately from her heat. Suddenly, alarms went off in her room. Her temperature had risen too high from her sad thoughts. The emergency cooling systems turned on, spraying super cold gas everywhere. Heiyun stepped back from the window and forced herself to think of empty, calm things. "Princess, are you all right?" Yuna's worried voice came through the speaker. "Yes, I'm fine," Heiyun answered. "Just a small spike. It's under control now." But it wasn't really under control. Every day, it took more effort to keep her emotions in check. Every day, the curse grew a tiny bit stronger. The doctors said that if they couldn't find a way to break it, the curse would eventually become too powerful for even her special room to handle. Heiyun looked back at the Earth ships coming closer. She had read that humans were very different from any other species the Empire had met. They lived in mild temperatures and had strange ways of controlling their body heat. She didn't know it yet, but those differences would soon change everything. Park Min-soo, the captain of the Imperial Guard, watched the princess's room sensors from his station. He saw the temperature readings slowly return to their usual dangerous levels. He had protected the princess since she was a child, but now all he could do was watch numbers on a screen. "The Earth delegation will arrive tomorrow," he said to himself. "Let's hope they bring better luck than our last diplomatic visitors." In her cold room, Princess Heiyun went back to her reading, trying not to think about tomorrow, trying not to hope. Hope was a strong emotion, and strong emotions were dangerous. But a small part of her wondered if maybe, just maybe, these humans might bring something new to her unchanging, isolated world. Lee Do-hyun adjusted his formal diplomatic uniform as the Earth shuttle approached the massive Celestial Empire flagship. He had been on many diplomatic missions before, but none as important as this one. This was humanity's first official meeting with the Celestial Empire. "Remember," Diplomat Lee said his assistant through the communication device, "the Celestials are very strict about their rules. Don't do anything unusual." Do-hyun smiled. Being unusual was exactly why Earth had chosen him for this mission. He was known for solving problems in unexpected ways. Where other diplomats saw walls, he looked for doors. The shuttle docked smoothly with the flagship. Do-hyun waited as the air pressure balanced between the ships. Through the window, he could see celestial guards in their shining uniforms waiting to greet them. Captain Park, Min-soo, met them at the entrance. He was tall, like most Celestials, with skin that had a slight blue tint. "Welcome to the Imperial flagship," he said in perfect Earth standard. "Please follow me to the welcome ceremony." As they walked through the ship's grand corridors, Do-hyun noticed something strange. The temperature changed dramatically from one section to another. Some areas were very cold, while others were warm. "Your ship has interesting temperature controls," Do-hyun said to Captain Park. The captain's face showed surprise for a moment. Most visitors didn't notice such things. "Yes," he said carefully. "We have special needs for different areas." They entered a massive hall where important-looking Celestials had gathered. Do-hyun noticed a large clear barrier at one end of the room. Behind it, he could see another room that looked extremely cold, with frost on the walls. Then he saw her. Princess Hae-yeon stood behind the barrier, wearing clothes that looked more like a spacesuit than royal dress. Even through the thick barrier, Do-hyun could feel warmth coming from her direction. But what caught his attention most was her eyes. They showed a loneliness he had never seen before. The ceremony began. Do-hyun listened as various officials made speeches about friendship between Earth and the Celestial Empire. But he kept glancing at the princess. Every time she showed any reaction to the speeches, the frost on her walls would melt a little. During a break in the ceremony, Do-hyun moved closer to the barrier. He noticed how everyone else stayed far away from it. The princess watched him with curiosity. "Diplomat Lee," Captain Park said quickly, "that area is restricted." "Oh, I was just admiring the interesting barrier technology," Do-hyun said innocently, but he had seen how the princess had responded when he came closer. The frost on her walls had actually increased, not melted. That was very interesting. It went against what he had observed earlier. After the ceremony, Do-hyun went to his assigned room and called Dr. Kim Ji-won, the human scientist on their team. "Dr. Kim, I need everything you can find about celestial biology and temperature regulation," he said, "and I need to know why they would keep someone in a frozen room." "That's classified information, Diplomat Lee," Dr. Kim said. "The Celestials are very private about their royal family." "Then we'll have to find out ourselves," Do-hyun replied. "Because I think something very important is happening on this ship, and I think we humans might be able to help." In her cold room, Princess Hae-yeon thought about the human diplomat who had dared to come closer to her barrier. For the first time in years, her temperature had dropped instead of rising when someone approached. She looked at her room's temperature display, wondering what it meant. The curse had never done that before. 1 week after the welcome ceremony, Do-hyun found himself walking past Princess Hae-yeon's section of the ship again. He had been doing this every day, studying the temperature readings on the public displays outside her room. Each time he passed, he noticed something odd. The readings dropped slightly. Today, he stopped and took out his tablet. "Hello, Your Highness," he said to the communication screen by her door. "I'm Diplomat Lee Do-hyun. Would you allow me to ask you some questions about the Celestial Empire?" There was a long pause. Then the screen lit up, showing the princess in her protective clothing. "You're the human who noticed the temperature changes," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Do-hyun smiled, "and I'd noticed that they change differently when humans are nearby." Hae-yeon studied him through the screen. No one had ever pointed this out before. "Come to the viewing area," she said finally. The viewing area was a small room next to her main chamber, separated by the thick barrier. When Do-hyun entered, he could see her clearly. She stood close to the barrier, closer than she usually stood to any divide. "Your protective suit," Do-hyun said. "It's not just for ceremony, is it?" "No," Hae-yeon replied. She watched as he walked closer to the barrier. The temperature displays showed the numbers dropping again. "How are you doing that?" "I'm not doing anything," Do-hyun said. "But humans are different from Celestials. Our bodies handle heat differently. He placed his hand on the barrier. We can cool ourselves down very efficiently. Hei-yun moved closer too. Usually, when she got this close to anyone, the alarms would sound, but they stayed quiet. "Tell me about Earth," she said. "What's it like to live without barriers?" Do-hyun sat down by the barrier, making himself comfortable. "On Earth, touch is very important," he began. "We shake hands when we meet. We hug our friends. We can sit close to each other and share meals." As he talked, Hei-yun sat down too. She asked questions about everything. About rain falling on skin, about holding cups of hot tea, about walking in crowds. Each question made Do-hyun more certain that the princess's isolation wasn't natural, even for a celestial. "Your Highness," he said carefully, "I've studied some celestial biology. Your people don't normally need this much cooling." Hei-yun was quiet for a moment. "No," she said finally. "We don't. But I'm cursed." She told him about the Flame Seekers, about the failed peace talks, about 5 years of isolation. As she spoke, frost started forming on her side of the barrier, but less than usual when she talked about difficult things. "Interesting," Do-hyun said. He made notes on his tablet. "And you've never left this section of the ship since then?" "I can't," Hei-yun said. "I would burn everything. Everyone." Her voice was sad, but the frost barely formed at all. Do-hyun looked at his temperature readings again. "Princess," he said, "would you allow Dr. Kim Ji-won, our scientist, to study these readings? I think we might be able to help." Before Hei-yun could answer, Captain Park's voice came through the speaker. "Diplomat Lee, your time is up. The princess needs her rest." As Do-hyun stood to leave, Hei-yun spoke quickly. "Come back tomorrow, please." "Tomorrow," he promised. As he walked away, he sent a message to Dr. Kim. "I need everything you can find about human heat regulation compared to celestial biology. I think we've been looking at this curse all wrong." In her cold room, Princess Hei-yun looked at the spot where Do-hyun had sat. For the first time in 5 years, she felt something dangerous. Hope. But strangely, the alarms stayed quiet. Dr. Kim Ji-won stared at her computer screen in amazement. She had been studying the temperature readings from Princess Hei-yun's room for 3 days now. The numbers told an incredible story. "Diplomat Lee," she called Do-hyun to her lab. "You need to see this right away." Do-hyun arrived quickly. He had been meeting with the princess every day, talking through the barrier. Each time, he had worn a special temperature sensor that Dr. Kim gave him. "Look at these charts." Dr. Kim pointed to her screen. "When any celestial comes near the princess, her temperature rises. But when you're there, it drops. And look at this. It drops more each time you visit." Do-hyun studied the charts carefully. "What makes humans so different?" "That's the amazing part," Dr. Kim said. She pulled up another image showing 2 bodies, one human, one celestial. Celestials store heat in their bodies. When they feel strong emotions, that heat builds up. But humans, we release heat. We sweat. We breathe it out. Our bodies are always working to stay cool." "And the curse?" Do-hyun asked. "The curse forces the princess to build up heat from her emotions. But it's not natural for celestials to hold that much heat. That's why it's so dangerous." Dr. Kim's eyes were bright with excitement. "But humans might be able to help. We're like heat sponges." Do-hyun thought about all his talks with Hei-yun. He remembered how the frost on her walls grew less and less each time. "We need to tell her about this." They went to the princess's viewing area together. When Hei-yun saw Dr. Kim's charts, her eyes widened behind her protective mask. "You mean humans could take away some of my heat?" she asked quietly. "In theory, yes," Dr. Kim said. "Your curse makes you keep all your emotional heat inside. But humans naturally pull heat away from their surroundings. That's why you feel better when Diplomat Lee is here." "Could it break the curse?" Hae-yun's voice was full of hope. "We don't know yet," Dr. Kim said honestly, "but we'd like to try something. With your permission, we want to reduce the barrier's thickness just a little. Not remove it completely, but make it thinner. Then we can test if human presence helps more." Captain Park, who had been listening, stepped forward. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous." "Captain," Do-hyun said, "look at the numbers. The princess's temperature has dropped more in the past week than in 5 years. We have to try." Hae-yun stood up straighter. "I want to try," she said firmly. The room's temperature rose a little with her strong feelings, but not as much as it would have before. After much discussion, the captain finally agreed to a test. The next day, they would reduce the barrier's thickness by exactly 1 centimeter. That night, Do-hyun couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Hae-yun's words over the past week, about all the simple things she couldn't do, about how she watched the world through barriers. In her cold room, Hae-yun looked at her hands in their protective gloves. For the first time since the curse began, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she could touch things again. The temperature alarms stayed quiet, as if they too were holding their breath, waiting to see what tomorrow would bring. The day of the barrier test arrived. Engineers had worked through the night to adjust the thick wall between Hae-yun's room and the viewing area. Now it was 1 centimeter thinner than before. Do-hyun entered the viewing area early in the morning. He carried Dr. Kim's latest temperature sensors. The princess waited on her side, standing closer to the barrier than she had ever dared before. "Good morning, Your Highness," Do-hyun said softly. "How do you feel today?" "Nervous," Hae-yun admitted. As she said this, everyone watched the temperature displays. The numbers rose slightly, but much less than they would have in the past. Dr. Kim monitored her instruments carefully. "The thinner barrier is working exactly as we hoped," she said. "The human cooling effect is stronger now." Over the next few hours, Do-hyun and Hae-yun talked about many things. He told her stories about Earth's oceans, about swimming in cool water under warm sun. She shared memories of her childhood, before the curse, when she could run through the palace gardens. Each time Hae-yun laughed or showed emotion, the temperature would rise, but then quickly fall again as Do-hyun's presence helped balance it. Dr. Kim took careful notes of everything. "Your Highness," Do-hyun said during a quiet moment, "what would you like to do first, if we can break this curse?" Hae-yun was silent for a moment. "I would like to feel the ship's garden grass under my feet," she said finally. "And maybe hold someone's hand." The temperature spiked suddenly at her words, but instead of the usual alarms and emergency cooling, something different happened. The heat seemed to flow toward Do-hyun's side of the barrier, making the air shimmer between them. "This is amazing," Dr. Kim exclaimed, checking her readings. "The human cooling effect is actually pulling excess heat through the barrier now. Princess, your base temperature has dropped 2 degrees. Captain Park, who had been watching everything closely, stepped forward. "Could we make the barrier even thinner?" he asked. "Not yet," Dr. Kim cautioned. "We need more data. But these results are very promising." Over the next few days, Do-hyun spent more and more time in the viewing area. He brought books to read with Hae-yun, and they would sit on opposite sides of the barrier, sharing stories and ideas. Each day, her temperature readings became more stable. One afternoon, as Do-hyun described an Earth Spring Festival, Hae-yun reached out and placed her gloved hand against the barrier. Without hesitation, Do-hyun placed his hand opposite hers. Through the barrier, Hae-yun could feel a gentle cooling sensation spreading from where their hands almost met. For the first time in 5 years, she felt truly hopeful about her future. But neither of them noticed Captain Park's worried expression as he studied a report about unusual energy readings coming from the edge of the Empire. The Flame Seeker's ships had been spotted, moving in their direction. In her quarters that night, Dr. Kim reviewed all the data again. The princess's temperature was definitely becoming more stable, but she worried they were running out of time. The curse was still active, and according to her calculations, It was slowly growing stronger despite their progress. They needed to find a complete solution soon, before it was too late. The alarms on the Imperial flagship started blaring in the middle of the night. Captain Park rushed to the bridge, already knowing what he would find. The Flame Seekers' ships had arrived. How did they get past our outer defenses? He demanded. They used some kind of new cloaking technology, his officer reported. They're surrounding us now. In her room, Princess Hei-Yun woke to the sound of the alarms. Her temperature immediately began to rise with her fear. The cooling systems worked harder to keep up. Do-hyun was running toward her section of the ship when he met Dr. Kim in the corridor. The Flame Seekers are here, Dr. Kim said, breathing hard. They're the ones who cursed her. They must have found out about our experiments. They reached the princess's viewing area just as the first attack hit the ship. The whole vessel shook. Hei-Yun stumbled in her room, and the temperature displays showed dangerous numbers. Your Highness, Do-hyun called through the barrier. We need to get you to a safer location. I can't leave, Hei-Yun said. Her voice was shaking. The curse. My emotions are too strong right now. I'll burn through any transport pod. Another blast rocked the ship. Captain Park's voice came through the speakers. The Flame Seekers are targeting our main power systems. They're trying to disable our cooling technology. Dr. Kim checked her instruments. The princess's temperature is rising too fast. The cooling systems can't keep up, even with the human cooling effect through the barrier. Hei-Yun pressed her hands against the barrier, trying to stay calm. Do-hyun put his hands opposite hers, but even his presence wasn't enough this time. The curse was feeding on her fear and anger. Suddenly, the main power flickered. The cooling systems in Hei-Yun's room stuttered. For a moment, everything went dark. When the emergency lights came on, they showed disaster. The temperature in Hei-Yun's room was climbing rapidly. The walls began to show signs of melting. The main cooling system is offline, Captain Park reported. Backup systems are not responding. Hei-Yun backed away from the barrier, terrified. Her fear made the heat worse. The curse was creating a deadly cycle. Fear caused heat, and heat caused more fear. Do-hyun, she called out, using his first name for the first time. Get away from here, please. I can't control it anymore. But Do-hyun stayed where he was. He watched as the barrier between them began to show signs of stress from the extreme heat. The princess's protective clothing was the only thing keeping her alive now. Dr. Kim grabbed his arm. We have to leave. The heat levels are becoming lethal. Another blast from the Flame Seekers hit the ship. More systems failed. In her room, Hei-Yun fell to her knees as the heat became unbearable. The curse was burning through everything, feeding on her emotions, growing stronger with each passing second. Do-hyun looked at Dr. Kim's readings, then at Hei-Yun. In that moment, he made a decision that would either save everything or destroy it all. The barrier is going to fail anyway, he said. We have to try something else. The ship shook with another blast from the Flame Seekers. Inside her rapidly heating room, Princess Hei-Yun tried to stand, but the heat was too much. The curse burned hotter than ever before, feeding on her fear and desperation. Temperature critical, Dr. Kim shouted, looking at her devices. The barrier will fail in less than 2 minutes. Do-hyun stepped closer to the barrier, feeling the intense heat on his face. Princess, he called out, do you trust me? Hei-Yun looked up at him through her protective mask. The walls around her were starting to melt. Yes, she whispered. Dr. Kim, Do-hyun said firmly, your research showed that humans can absorb heat from the princess. What if we did more than just stand near her? What if we made direct contact? Dr. Kim's eyes widened. The temperature would kill you instantly. No, Do-hyun said, remembering all their research. You said humans are like heat sponges. We release heat naturally. The curse traps heat inside her, but we let it flow out. What if that's the key? Captain Park's voice crackled through the failing speakers. The Flame Seekers have disabled our last backup cooling system. We have less than a minute before total failure. Do-hyun looked at the barrier's control panel. One emergency release button would open a small door in the barrier. It was meant for passing medical supplies in emergencies. "Hey-yun," he called, using her name directly. "I'm coming in." "No," she cried. "You'll die." But Do-hyun had already made his choice. He pressed the emergency release button. A small door in the barrier slid open, letting out a wave of burning hot air. Dr. Kim tried to stop him, but Do-hyun moved too quickly. He stepped through the small door into Hae-yun's room. The heat hit him like a wall, but he kept moving. Hae-yun tried to back away, terrified of hurting him. "Please," she begged, "don't come closer. I can't control it." Do-hyun's skin felt like it was on fire, but he kept walking toward her. "You don't have to control it," he said. "Let it flow. That's what humans do. We don't hold heat in. We let it move through us." He reached for her protective mask. Hae-yun was frozen in place, torn between fear and hope. The room's temperature was now hot enough to melt metal. "Trust me," Do-hyun said again, and gently removed her mask. Hae-yun's face was beautiful and terrified. The air between them shimmered with heat. Do-hyun could feel his consciousness starting to fade from the extreme temperature. With his last moment of clear thought, he did the bravest and most foolish thing possible. He kissed her. The heat that flowed between them was like nothing either had ever felt before. It should have killed him instantly. But instead of burning him, the heat seemed to flow through him and out, like water finding a new path to the sea. Hae-yun felt it too. The curse's heat finally finding a way to release instead of building up inside her. She had been a sealed pot about to explode. Now, at last, the pressure had somewhere to go. Around them, the room's temperature displays began to change. But neither of them noticed, lost in the moment when everything changed. Dr. Kim stared at her instruments in amazement. The temperature readings were falling rapidly. Where there had been deadly heat moments before, now there was only normal warmth. The curse's energy flowed through Do-hyun like a river finding a new path. Instead of building up inside Hae-yun, it moved through him and dispersed into the air. Human biology, so different from celestial nature, provided the release the curse had never allowed. When Hae-yun and Do-hyun finally broke apart, the room's walls had stopped melting. The emergency alarms were quiet. Even the air felt different, cooler, cleaner, free of the tension that had filled it for 5 years. "The curse," Hae-yun whispered, touching her own face with bare hands for the first time in years. "It's gone." Dr. Kim rushed into the room with her sensors. "Not gone," she said excitedly, "but changed. The Flame Seekers designed the curse to trap heat inside you, but they never considered what would happen if that heat found a way to flow naturally." She looked at her readings again. "Your temperature is normal, completely normal." Captain Park's voice came through the speakers, sounding both worried and hopeful. "The Flame Seekers are still attacking. Their weapons. Let me talk to them," Hae-yun interrupted. Her voice was stronger now, filled with new confidence. "Put me on the main communication screen." When the Flame Seeker's leader appeared on the screen, he looked shocked to see Hae-yun standing there without her protective gear. "Impossible," he said. "Our curse was perfect." "Your curse taught me something important," Hae-yun said calmly. Do-hyun stood beside her, ready to help if the heat began to rise again. "But it didn't. You tried to trap heat inside me, to make my emotions a weapon against myself. But emotions aren't meant to be trapped. They're meant to flow, to be shared." She held up her bare hand for all to see. "Your curse is broken, not by fighting it, but by finding a better way. Perhaps it's time for your people and mine to try the same." The Flame Seekers' ships withdrew within the hour. Their greatest weapon had been overcome not by force, but by understanding and connection. It changed everything about how they saw the Celestial Empire and how they saw humans. In the days that followed, Hae-yun walked through the ship's gardens for the first time in 5 years. She felt the grass under her feet, just as she had dreamed. The curse's energy still flowed through her, but now it had a way out, a way to balance itself naturally. Human biology really is remarkable, Dr. Kim said, making her final notes. Your bodies don't just cool yourselves. You help cool the things around you. You make balance possible. Do-hyun smiled as he watched Ho-yen touch a flower with bare fingers. Sometimes the best solutions are the simplest ones, he said, not fighting against nature, but working with it. Speaking of simple solutions, Ho-yen said, walking back to him with a smile, I think I need another kiss. Just to make sure the curse stays broken, of course. Of course, Do-hyun agreed seriously. We should probably make that a regular treatment, for scientific purposes. As they kissed again, the temperature in the garden rose just slightly, and then settled into perfect balance, just as it was always meant to be.